Hello, everybody. I'm a practicing therapist and a doctoral student of psychology. Today, I want to talk about how women can fantasize about men they find attractive. Now, it is important to understand that based on the studies that we're going to talk about, attraction may not be the only reason why these fantasies occur. But today, we're actually going to talk about some of that research together. And then we're going to talk about the signs that this could be occurring or how it looks like behaviorally. And so, first, let's talk about what fantasy actually is based on studies. Now, I'm using one in 1995 because it is the most fundamental one. There are more updated ones, including the one in 2023, which I will also cite. But I think it's important to first look back at the 1995 one and why it is fundamental. What we found is that this type of fantasy, and you can look at the research because some words I do have to omit because we're putting this on YouTube. But what we see is that fantasy in general does generate some sort of mental imagery. We do see thoughts, scenarios, sometimes actually very frequently there is scenarios that have that sort of content to which the individual who is fantasizing may be perceiving as more intimate, romantic, etc., which can increase or intensify or even produce. Produce was also cited in there. Arousal, desire, emotional experience. And so let's take a bit on the emotional experience subpoint because research in 2023 does also show that experience might not entirely lean on the perspective of wanting that physical connection, but sometimes a form of escapism as well. And so that's something to keep in mind. So let's continue with the 2023 research. What is the pattern of fantasy? A person, then there is normally, not always the case, attraction or desire, imagination of intimacy, and then increased desire and arousal. Okay. And so sometimes the second stage there, the attraction and desire, can sometimes be some other attachment for whatever reason, to which the fourth one is actually not increased arousal or desire, but increased escapism. Okay. So that is something to keep in mind. But today we're going to talk about how to distinguish and what it looks like when someone is attracted. But before we do, let's still talk about two other points, and then we'll get into the points here because I wrote these down because I felt like it's important. That research in 2023 does show that the mechanism of fantasy in our brain and also how we perceive things can actually stimulate pleasure as well and can sometimes allow people to either lean on pleasure for themselves or in that relationship or with you. And so that can be helpful to help them slowly get closer to the idea of doing those things with you, for example. And now there's another thing that's really important. Sorry about the laptop noise. I kept this percentage in my note because I felt like this was very important. Around 90 to 97% of people does seem that they do experience fantasizing. And so it is not just incredibly common, most people do it, okay? And so that is something to keep in mind. So what are those signs? What do they look like? The first one is a specific gaze pattern that signals interest, okay? So we've talked about this gaze pattern before, but it is brief glances followed by repeated looks and eventually longer gazes, which can signal attraction, not just escapism towards that fantasy, to which a lot of times there is a potential that one or both of you have some form of fantasy. It doesn't even have to be explicitly intimate. Sometimes it can be fantasizing about maybe you getting to know her, maybe being in a relationship with you, maybe what a relationship or having a marriage looks like with you. Fantasies are not entirely always intimate in nature. Sometimes it can be social in nature from that perspective. Group socialization, right? Marriage is a good example of a group socialization. These patterns were systematically observed in naturalistic settings, okay? The next one is she may imply certain activities. She may say something like, I redid my bedroom. Do you want to come and see? Right? So this might be an example of her trying to indirectly invite you in, something of that sort. Sometimes it can be a little bit more direct, where she might say, I'm about to do something, you should join, and then maybe we can do A, B, and C, which is a lot more of an intimate activity. Or she might say something like a massage. Do you want a massage? You can come into my bedroom, something of that sort. This is a little bit obvious, but some cases I have where they still miss it. And so I'd like to share that with you, which I've talked about on this channel before. The next one is that there is a specific or targeted posture and body movement that can enhance physical visibility. And so this actually includes, and it's not limited to, but tilting of the head, open body orientation, leaning forward, Leaning towards you, that one's quite obvious. And then if there's an item in her hand, for example, that item is also towards you. A cell phone is a very good example where it might be her hand and the cell phone might be towards you there, okay? The next one is she compliments you on specific qualities. This one signals attraction in general, not just in an intimate setting, but it does actually help, especially if those specific qualities might lean more towards that. And I'll explain some examples in a little bit here. But first, general qualities might be you're friendly, you're nice. Specific qualities might be I appreciate how hard you work. I appreciate how honest you are. I appreciate how much effort you put into the gym. These are specific qualities that allows us as individuals, observers, to kind of understand where her mind is going to when she's looking at those specific qualities. More often than not, women, more particularly than men, they take a little bit more time to observe these specific qualities. And so if she is, in fact, indicating these specific qualities that she sees in you in a compliment form, often it's because she has considered what that quality could do for both of you guys. And so if she does specifically target your ambition, there is a possibility she's thinking about that she finds it attractive, that you have perseverance, that she perceives that you guys can perhaps have a beneficial relationship, etc. And so she might think that directly and indirectly. The next one is I feel very obvious, and it is very common. If this is most people who have this type of connection intimately, emotionally, romantically towards somebody, they keep their body close to you. And so if you guys are sitting together, sitting in some sort of situation, whatever it may be, the sitting position is very close. And sometimes when you're talking to each other, especially if there's that intense, some people call it chemistry, right? A lot of times you will see that the position that you guys have, let's say you guys were standing, okay? The position is now, the gap between you guys is getting smaller and smaller and smaller as the conversation progresses. And normally what happens is it stops at one point because the individual, perhaps you or her or both, feels like the next step is a much more intimate, private, romantic, whatever it is, setting to which you cannot do in that particular moment. And so often that can signify that there's something more to be perceived or viewed, what you guys can do about that. The next one is she appears relaxed around you, and normally her body language is less tense. And so in these particular scenarios, if she's getting closer to you but she's very tense, this may not mean that she's fantasizing necessarily. It might be that she's nervous you'll reject her, but it's not necessarily the fantasy component. When that gap is getting more smaller, we can see that she's becoming more and more relaxed because there's a subconscious preparation, whether she knows it or not, to relax her body in case that act does occur next, okay? And the tenseness can create more issues for that act to happen, if that makes sense. This is purely, I'm just talking about it from a scientific and more helpful standpoint. This is for educational purposes only. I hope that's clear. And the next one is, I think, also quite obvious, but I mean, these are the true signs, so a lot of them may be obvious, is when you guys are hugging or embracing, it is longer than maybe it typically is, or her hands will go in certain positions, such as behind your neck, or certain areas like that, to which it's in a more intimate embrace, okay? And so the examples are the one we just said: hugging longer, more relaxed around you, keeps your body close, complements specific qualities, targeted postures, imply activities, and a gaze pattern. The research is in the description box. I hope this video is helpful to somebody. Please like, subscribe. I'll see you in the next one.